Welcome back to the channel, guys. So today we got to talk about this Sony PlayStation Classic controversy in a little more detail. So this has been the talk of the town for the past couple days now. And what is it about? Well, it was discovered because of Sony holding these little press events for journalists that they're actually using an open source emulator for their device instead of something of their own creation. This has led a lot of people to say, hey, this is a very lazy effort by Sony. And a lot of people are just really put off by this. Not just the game selection, but them using an open source emulator and just kind of a bare bones effort with the features it has. So once you really dig into it and you take a look, it was discovered that it is using this emulator here, the PCSX rearmed emulator. PCSX has been around for a long while. Originally came out around 2000. It's been updated frequently over the years. The PCSX rearmed version is a fork of the reloaded version, and it's made for ARM architecture-based processors, for ARM-based computers. And there's a lot of them out there, for sure. There's a lot of single-board computers that are ARM-based, and they're very capable of playing PlayStation 1 games on the cheap. One of the biggest, most popular options is the Raspberry Pi 3B or the 3B Plus. Uses an ARM processor, can run PCSX rearmed just fine, and play these games great, in my opinion. So essentially, we know the PlayStation Classic is going to be something very similar to, the specs of a Raspberry Pi. They're not going to do anything outrageous, obviously. It's cheap enough to get a single board computer that can run this and be able to play PlayStation 1 games fairly well. But when you really dig into this, it's just odd. I can't get this out of my mind. Why would Sony use somebody else's emulator? And there's also been some other question out there. Some people had brought up in my previous video, well, does Sony have any right to do this? Isn't this illegal to use an open source emulator? And the answer is no, essentially, with this one anyway. If you take a look at the license for rearmed for the PCSX emulator, it has a general public license that allows the use for, selling or distributing this any which way you want, but there are some caveats to it. You can take a look at this. I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but essentially it just says that, hey, if you're going to use this emulator, you're going to distribute it either for money or for free in your device. That's fine, but the customer, the receiver, whoever's getting this end product needs to have the same rights as you. They need to be able to access the original source code and all that kind of stuff, or be able to be notified of how. And that is essentially how people found out that that's, the emulator they're using, because they're following this general public license and listing it, within the user interface of the PlayStation Classic. So yeah, they can use it. They can manipulate it a little bit. They can do certain things however they choose, as long as you have access to the source code. So it's fine that they're using this, but the gaming community, maybe not as a whole, but a lot of us are questioning this. Why are you being lazy and using an open source emulator? Because when you really dig into it and you look at this device, it's very bare bones. A lot of people have already said that. The features that they utilize, that they give you, are very limited in comparison to what this emulator can actually do. So, there's nothing crazy that this emulator does as far as, features, but most of these features are not able to be utilized on the PlayStation Classic. Save states, yes, they have them, but it's like one per game. You press reset, it overwrites your save state, that kind of thing. It's wonky, it sounds weird. I'm still not 100% how that works, but definitely what this emulator is capable of, Sony's not utilizing. No, graphical features as far as overlays or, display settings, that kind of thing. You're just given what they give you You get what they give you, nothing else, no borders, nothing of interest like other devices have done. And you can still argue other companies have been lazy as well. Sony's not the only one. Sony's not the only one guilty of this, but I think a lot of people are upset with it because Sony does have their own official emulators. And that's really why a lot of us are questioning this. Why didn't Sony just take Pops and adapt that to this system? Why didn't they figure this out on their own? Did they just outsource this project to another company and just say, hey, make this thing? That is really what people are starting to think, because if you have your own emulator, if you have access to be able to emulate your games, why would you use something that the community made? And the reason I think that is because when you go back in time, there was a specific emulator that Sony went after. Sony has not had the best relations with people making emulators. So if you recall, way back in the day, Bleem, they made an emulator for, that played PlayStation 1 games, and it was made for the Dreamcast and PC, but it did have to use the original discs. It wasn't just like download games. You had to use the original discs for this to work. And at that time, Sony did not like this. They liked it. They didn't like it for kind of a different reason. And I still think this relates to this story in a sense, because it just was crazy. If you look at the actual lawsuit, Sony did file a lawsuit against Bleem. Pretty much what they were saying is that they were violating their rights by providing access to PlayStation games on a non-Sony system. That pretty much PlayStation 1 games should only be able to be played on Sony hardware, and that this constituted unfair competition. And that makes a little bit of a sense. Sony wouldn't want, like, hey, you can just pop your PlayStation discs into a GameCube or something. That wouldn't make sense, but it makes sense that they wouldn't want that to happen. But ultimately, Sony did lose this lawsuit. The other issue they had with it wasn't just that, but there was other things as well, like the packaging and marketing for Bleem. Bleemcast for the Dreamcast had Sony PlayStation games, pictures and images represented on the box art. And the judge still said, no, that's fine. That constitutes fair use. They can advertise this. This is what their product does. So Sony didn't like that. They lost, but it still kind of sucked because Bleem ultimately, they went under. They couldn't afford all this, the legal fees and just fighting this battle. And then it didn't help that also at the same time, once this was said and done, the big thing, playing this on the Dreamcast, Sega had announced, hey, the Dreamcast is done. We're no longer producing this. So it just kind of, they were shit out of luck, to be honest. Like, everything just kind of fell apart for them. But ultimately, this just shows Sony didn't really have a great relationship with people creating emulators that played Sony games. And just looking at this now, you have your own emulator. You're giving us a bare bones system. You're using an open source emulator that you put no work into. If they manipulated it anyway, sure, I'm pretty positive they did in order to, incorporate this into their lackluster user interface. But the bulk of the work was done for them. You could always argue, well, it doesn't matter, it was meant to play Sony games, and if it plays it just fine, hey, well, Sony's in their right to use it. It's used to play their games. And that's fine, but, at the same time, it's just, a lot of people are just looking at this as it's a cash grab. Anything's a cash grab. I mean, you can argue that companies want to make money, but the effort put into this is just so minimal that it's really pissing people off and making people want to cancel their pre-orders. We can argue about the games all we want, the 20 included games on the system. I think there's some solid ones. A lot of people do say, this is representative of what the PlayStation was in its early days, so I'm fine with it. A lot of people are like that. Me, I'm just like, don't mix it up. I knew from the get-go it was going to be hard to please everybody with the game selection, but it did kind of seem like, for me personally, what am I going to play on this thing? And that's the same for a lot of people. But ultimately, in the end, it's the execution of the device. It almost seems like Sony just outsourced this thing, had somebody else produce everything for them. Because why would there be an open source emulator being used? Why wouldn't they use their own? Why is it bare minimum as far as options go? One save state, no, options for display settings, no bezels, no CRT filters, nothing. It's just you get what they give you and nothing else. Other companies, even the ones that have been fairly lazy with the execution of their devices, they still have given more options than what Sony is doing. This thing could be so hot for people, and I think it's still going to be a big seller regardless, because people are going to see this on the shelves and be like, oh my God, that's cool, and buy it, even though a lot of people can still argue that, hey, these early 3D games just don't hold up to today's standards. I think that's kind of a mixed truth, because it's all in the eye of the beholder. If you really have nostalgia for some of these games, you're going to enjoy them. I know I'm going to enjoy a good handful of these games regardless. But it just sucks when you ultimately look at this thing and there's nothing special about it. And I know I'm going to get heat for that. Oh, you're saying there's nothing special about it. It's an official Sony product. But what it is delivering and how it is delivering it, I can set up on my own. If it's an official product using official emulators with settings that Sony tweaked and did on their own to make the best experience possible, that is something to be proud of. That is something to be, wow, I really want this. But when you're just giving us a device that we can just go buy an original PlayStation, even, the PS1, and gut it, or find one that doesn't work anymore and gut it and put a Raspberry Pi in there and make it look nice and run the same emulator that this thing is going to run. I mean, what's the point ultimately in the end? Great to have options. Don't want to argue that. I think it's awesome to have options, but I really wish Sony would have put more effort into this device, because I was extremely hyped and a lot of people were as well. And now we have been let down quite a bit with the reveal of what we're actually getting here. Not even so much the games, it's just the emulator they're using, the options we're given. It's disappointing to some don't care. But I just wanted to talk about this a little more today because, yeah, it's something a lot of people have been bringing up to me and saying, what do you really feel about that? I feel it sucks, guys. I really think Sony should have went a different route with this thing. Even with the included games, fine. Okay, I can accept it. It's not the games I wanted, but it's not, you can't make a system just for one person, because the games I would want, not everybody else would want. But just the way you put the package together really could have been something awesome and special and unique. And now I think that's kind of lost. It is what it is, guys. So do appreciate you guys stopping in, hanging out with me for these few minutes. I mean, it's probably almost 14, 15 minutes. I don't know. But thanks. Share your comments down below. How do you feel about them doing this? Making a device that there's really not much special to it that we can't do ourselves. You can use the same emulator. Similarly, I always have a hard time saying that word. Similarly, you know what I'm freaking saying. But a same type device, man, my brain is not working. A same type device doing the same things, same specs, similar specs, and using the same software that they're using. Give me a break, Sony. So thank you. Smash that like button. Slap around that notification bell. Subscribe if you haven't done so already. And I will catch you guys next time. Man, I got to get some sleep. I'm tired. Peace out. Bye-bye. And boom.